Hey guys, it's TTL back with another video for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Corsair 465X or 465X. Now this is a revamped, sort of new and updated version of one of my actual favourite cases that Corsair's ever made, and that's the 460X. So this new and updated version, is it a hit or is it a miss? So straight into the review itself, we always start at the front and at the top. And yes, I have tipped the case over, but it's just easier for me to be able to zoom you in like this. So this is your power button. You've got a couple of USB 3s, then you've got a combined headphone and a microphone port, and then you have a reset switch just over here. And this is just part of the air vents for the front of the case, which will make a little bit more sense in a minute. With the top of the case, you can see that there's a large air vent, and it's got some mesh over the top. Helps clean the lines up if you're not going to be using it. It's not overly restrictive. I wouldn't call it a dust filter though. But then you do have there a couple of sets of mounts of fans. Now you can see down towards the front of the case, you can fit a 140mm, which is what that extra one is. But the bulk of the fan mounts are offset, and they're 120mm fan mounts, and you can put a 240mm fan in the a 240mm radiator in the roof should you want. But obviously, because of the offset, the fact that you're going to have the motherboard down there, it's going to be RAM dependent, as you'll see when we get further around on the inside of the case. So you're going to need short memory like the Corsair LPX memory, for example, if you're going to want to be looking at anything more than just fans in the roof. The front of the case itself, you can see that we've got this nice tempered glass panel there, and there are 4 screws on it, because the only way you can get to the dust filter on the other side is through these 4 screws. Once you have removed them though, it's not just the glass panel that comes off, it's pretty much the entirety of the front panel itself. The plastic is actually attached to the glass. It's also a good way for us to show that there is a slight tint on the glass itself. I would say though that it would be really nice if on the white cases there wasn't a tint, because I every time they do it I always hope that they hadn't. So with that you can see the dust filter for the front, but with that removed you can see the 3 LL fans in there. Now they've got there are 12 lights around the outside and there are 4 in the middle. Now the case does come with a new lighting controller, which is called the Lighting Node Core. But the reason why I've brought that up now, because I will show you it later, is if you were to buy these fans, they come with the, and you were to buy a pack of 3, they would come with the Lighting Node Pro and the 3 fans, and they cost about £70, somewhere sort of like £70 to £75. Now this case itself is £109 and comes with those fans and a controller that can control 6 RGB fans. So it's strangely, when you put those numbers together, it does make it sound really good value for money. We'll leave the business side for a second and move around to the back of the case. And you've got a normal 7 expansion slots around the back, normal ATX layout, power supply in the bottom with a dust filter. It's only a little small dust filter. Makes it easier when you've got it near the edge of a desk, but just a small dust filter. 120mm fan in the back, which you can move up and down. Now one thing I will say is the case does not come with a rear exhaust fan, just the 3 in the front. You can obviously take one out the front if you want, move it into the back, or you can get yourself a matching light loop LL fan to put in the back if you want. Now that's what we've done for this part of the build. But what we did when we do the testing is we've done it with the fan added and how the case would arrive, so you get both sets of temperature readings, but we'll cover that in a minute. Other thing, you've got a vertical GPU mount in the back, but it's quite close to the outside of the case over here. So one thing I would say is if you're going to do this, it is quite close, and you're only going to be able to use a maximum of a dual slot graphics card. If you've got any of the bigger graphics cards that are floating around nowadays, like the Strix, for example, it's going to be, well, that just won't fit in the outside. If you've got a dual slot graphics card, it's going to be very close to the outside of the case. So my advice would be for this mount, I would personally only use this if you're going to be using a water-cooled graphics card in the side, because then you haven't got to worry about airflow. If you want to go vertical GPU, there are a lot of manufacturers out there now, Cooler Master being one of them, Cable Mod being a second, where there's an adapter that screws into the 7 IOs, and then basically the graphics card sits that much further in on the case, gives you much better airflow, and you're not going to run into any air starvation issues or anything like that. So that's my 2 bits of advice for vertical GPU in the back of this case. But obviously it is just advice, and it's not written in the Bible. So round to the back of the case, and one thing I do want to say about straight away is this, and this is the light in node core. It allows you to control 6 RGB items, 6 RGB fans, hasn't got the funky cover or anything on it, but there's something about it which I saw straight away and it kind of bothered me a lot. So if I zoom you in, you can see that it's mounted in 3 points over here, and there's like little motherboard standoffs on the other side, and you can pop those screws out. Now over here you can see that there's a 2.5 inch hard drive mount there, and you slide down a little bit more and there's a second 2.5 inch hard drive mount. That's what the 4 screws are around the outside, but the other 5 weird ones in the middle is actually a secondary mount for your lighting node. So if you wanted to put a second lighting node in, that's what those 5 screws are there for. But the problem is when you go round to the other side of the case, those 5 holes are visible, and if you're not going to end up using that, they're just 5 holes that didn't really need to be there. And it is a really picky thing for me to pick up on, but I don't really think that they needed to be there. So that is the standard mounting point over there for the lighting node core, and then the secondary ones over there, which you can see from the outside or the other side. But what I don't understand is if you've got one there like that, why didn't they just have a couple more of those little screw points over here? Because there's ample amounts of room for you to be able to tuck cables still on the other side should you have mounted it over here, and it would have literally been 3 little screw holes that you wouldn't have seen, exactly the same as it would have been on the other side of the case, and you could have had the second one over there. And I don't know, it's attention to detail like this for me that Corsair used to be famed for, and the last few cases that they've come out, it's these little details that I think separate them from being, you know, like just a normal cheaper build manufacturer. And I can't express it enough. That is, I know it's very picky, but I never used to have very picky things like this with Corsair to moan about. And also that fix is so ridiculously simple, I don't understand why you then want to impact the aesthetics on the main side of the build. I'm going to leave that there. I've actually spoken and talked to Corsair, the Corsair rep, directly about this. I said to him about it, and yeah, so I don't like it. You've then got 2.5 inch hard drive mounts on the back, which obviously is a solid state drive size, or you can use for little laptop drive size drives if you want a smaller 2 terabyte hard drive or up to 2 terabyte hard drive. Power supply in the bottom. There is 2 mechanical hard drives mounts that you have down here if you want to use them. I always end up using them to stash cables in. Now the power supply that I have in mine is 160mm long. They do say that you can get up to 180mm in there, and it will accommodate it absolutely fine. It will just be a little bit tighter with cables. One thing you can see though is there are lots of cable tie down places scattered around the outside of the case. So although I've not done a particularly amazing job of doing an anal clean build with this one, this is probably just like an average build that you guys might do at home with a little bit of cable tied in it. We've also got some pass-throughs for cables for the front up at the top. It's a very well laid out case in that regard. It's just the kind of secondary mount over here that I was being horrifically anally kind of like picky about. But I think for a company like Corsair, it would have been quite an easy fix, and it would have made the building kind of visuals on the other side of the case much more aesthetically pleasing. Round to the business side of the case, and you do just have 4 screws with rubber grommets on them to remove to get access from the tempered glass panel. And yes, I know that I'm unscrewing all of them on camera, but it's because I also wanted to show you the tint again. It is a very light tint, as far as tints go, that is. But I'm going to stand firm with a white case. It would be very nice if it was a clear window on it, because, you know, white, you want the white inside. I don't know, it's just the way that I feel about it. You guys will have to tell me how you feel about it. Straight away, one of the things I will say, and I say every time I see this, is that gap at the front. I understand it's for a radiator. Totally get it. I would just like to see that covered up. Because if you don't put a 360mm rad in it, doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, I know the 120mm fan gets covered up. Not covered up, but it's kind of like halfway between. I do still think it needed some kind of little clip-in tab there though, just so that, yes, the aesthetics are still there with the lights on the front, but when you look in the side, it's just a nice smooth panel that comes across. I'm going to leave that there. You can see further over here that there is some meshing on this side for if you have your power supply facing up. With the power supply cover, this is normally the time that I would say don't put your power supply up, have it drawing in from the other side. If your case is completely open and you don't have a power supply cover, then that's the point when I personally have my power supply with the fan turning up. Now, I know that fries a lot of people's brains, and people think that the fans blow inwards, and they don't. They exhaust out the back. I don't really want to kind of go through all of those dramas and everything again. So CPU cooler wise, you're looking at a maximum of 170mm of total height available. We have in here a 120mm fan-based cooler fitted, but some 140mm fan-based coolers can fit. You're just going to have to do a little bit of homework, which ones can be accepted and which ones can't. One of the things I will say as a rough rule of thumb is pretty much all of the 120mm based fan towers will go in there, and then you're only going to depend on whether it's going to fit with your memory or it's going to fit with your motherboard itself. Can be a bit of a minefield, but I can't really do anything about certain specifics. I do want to just draw attention to the fact again that there is a 120mm LL fan fitted in the back. I have fitted this. It doesn't come with the case as standard. It's fitted because during our initial build and testing phase, we tested it with the case as it arrives, and that's without the fan. Then we added it in, did all of our tests again, and you'll see the thermal results in a moment. You can see from this side though that it does make for a nice, tidy, clean build. We've gone with everything grey, but luckily, we say we've gone for everything grey. This is our standard test kit with this, and we move this from each case just so that we've got a standard set of equipment so that we can do thermals with. You can see on this side though that if I spin it a little bit more, you can see those 5 holes that I said about. I just kind of wish they weren't there, and I know I am being a bit annoying about it now, but anyway, a couple of grommets, all nice. Other than that, it's just a very nicely laid out case. You can get a 360mm radiator in the front if you wanted, including a 280 and a 240 if you should wish. With the fan mount in the roof, it's off center. So if you wanted to put a 240mm AIO in the roof, you can do. I would say that RAM dependent as well. You can go down the push-pull route and stuff like that as well if you want, because of that offset nature of the fan mounts. But it's going to come down to size with memory, as I've already spoken about. I'm just drawing attention to it again. There is up to, as I've said before, 370mm for GPU. If you put a radiator in there, then that's going to reduce the amount of length that you've got for your GPU available. So swiftly moving on to the testing, and as the graphs start to come up, one thing I will explain to you just quickly is the only things that we actually change during these tests are the case fan RPMs. The CPU fan is set at 12 volts, but then we have a 9 volt fan speed reducer in it. And the GPU is actually fixed to 60% fan speeds as well. And I'll talk to you through a couple of things, how the 60% fan speed on this can cause not issues, but actually helps us kind of get to a limit that we can like hit thermal limits really. But the CPU temps, the graph comes up and it all looks rather nice. But what we also do during our reviews, we then take exactly the same data and then we pop the graph up, and that is sorted for GPUs. Now you can see that in this case that you've got this 60 degrees. Now what happens with an NVIDIA graphics card is it won't go above 80 degrees. So our testing room was 20 degrees. So that then, so essentially you've got the 80 degrees for the GPU temperature, then the 20 degrees for the room, which you take off, and that gives us our 60 degrees ambient, or our delta temperature, sorry. So once you get up to that 80 degrees limit, the GPU will spin the fans up to keep it at 80 degrees. So even though we've manually fixed it at 60%, once it gets to 80 degrees, it will ramp it up a little bit more anyway. So that's just the way that they work. So with this, it actually hit what we'll call like the bottleneck for temperatures. And essentially what that does tell us is the LL fans at 600 RPM are just not that great at moving a great deal of air. But I do need to kind of stress a point here, is if you've got your GPU being run flat out, you're not likely to have your case fans at 600 RPM, because 600 RPM is a very, very quiet mode. It's the type of thing that you'll have if you're watching a film, for example, or you're doing just work on the desktop, doing sort of kind of normal stuff. If you were to ever be absolutely battering the GPU, like playing a really, really intensive game or doing a GPU specific render, it would make sense to have the air coming into the case be ramped up a little bit around it. And then when we move on to the next stage of tests, which is 1000 RPM, you can see that the extra airflow makes a great deal of difference on the CPU. And then when we flick to the GPU specific results, you can see it makes a big amount of difference there. It's not the hottest part of the graphs or anything. So all we can kind of say at that point is at 600 RPM, the LLs don't move a great deal of air. But the only cases so far that have really been able to have take that kind of battering, because it is a very extreme and very kind of not real world kind of test, is that the 140mm based cases do seem to prefer that little more. It was kind of unique to see the fact that the 465X at those RPMs with those fans run worse than the 678, but again, it's just down to the fans in front. And then what we do is we run on to maximum RPM, which for each case is going to be slightly different, which is why you can see the RPM rating written in the graph. But again, CPU did kind of well, and then the GPU, it was much, much better, and it actually came down at max RPM. It came down towards the bottom of the graph, which actually meant lower temperatures, which meant it was doing better. I could have probably sorted them slightly differently, but we prefer the hot ones to be at the top. Now, so 1000 RPM, midships, maximum fan RPMs, you see the airflow was actually really good. So the thing that we can take from this case is that the LL fans do need to be spun more to be able to get that air through. And then it was, once we were running with the faster RPMs, it was really, it favoured it really, really well. So if you were going to set this up at home, then low end stuff, it will end up being quite quiet. But if you want the extreme temps, you are going to need to spin the fan RPMs up above 1000. I think a nice kind of balancing point would probably be around the 1250 RPM kind of mark for a decent amount of airflow. Case obviously doesn't come with the rear one either, but it would make good sense if you wanted it all to match, to maybe get another box of 3 so that you had the one in the back and then you had a couple in the roof as well, if airflow is the thing that you're looking for. Because obviously we did do the extra fan test in this, which I've been explaining throughout the review, that we added the one in the back. So my thoughts on the case overall are, when I first saw the aesthetics of the front, I have to admit, personally, compared to the old case, I wasn't that struck by it. The original 460 I personally really liked, had that nice curving edge on the front, and it was the first time we'd ever really seen anything like that, and it was a nice case to look at. But the problem with tempered glass now is it's kind of everywhere. But the one thing that the 465X does bring to the table is those 3 RGB LLs in the front, and you do have the controller in the back as well, the light controller core. And when you mix the two together, the case actually does seem to become quite good value. So if you're going to be in the market for a Corsair based rig and you want RGB and it's the sort of thing that you know you definitely want, putting the two together does make a lot of sense, because in reality the fans, if you were to buy them separately, would cost you about £70 anyway, which means that the rest of the case is going to cost you 40 quid, and at that point it's a bit of a no-brainer when you consider all the glass and everything like that. But what it does mean is that if you buy this and you do want to get another pack of fans and you do want that 3 extra, then you already know that it's going to cost you like around the £70 mark to get it. And you will, but it will come with the lighting controller, but you won't need that. That's the only other thing as well, because the case is actually capable of controlling 6 fans or lighting strips with a bit of a combination, because it's either 6 fans or, well, it's 6 RGB items, whether it's fans or lighting strips. So I think the 465 is great value for money. It just doesn't give me that screaming aesthetics that I was actually really impressed with the original case. And I even actually had a 460 on my desk myself for probably 8-10 months. I actually like that case that much, and I do like this. It's just it's not got that kind of impact that the original one had on me. So it's a very clean case, very well laid out. Airflow is good once the fan RPMs are up, but with low fan RPMs, it's very quiet. The other thing that I would say is you're never really going to be stressing your graphics card out with such low RPMs anyway. And if you are, then you just need to go and get yourself a case with 140mm fans from standard, really. So good case, couple of little caveats. One of the things I would say is, especially with that lighting node thing, the secondary mounting point for that is not as high quality as I would have preferred Corsair to be, or certainly has been in the past. So good case, not great. And by not great, I mean it's good. I'm not going to say it's a great case, but it's a good case. And I do think that there are a few points about this now that I hope Corsair take on the chin and make sure that they roll their attention to detail out into anything that comes coming forward. But nevertheless, because of those fans and the packages and overall, it does get a value for money from me, which is why I would say it gets the OC3D value for money.